Nutrition to Me podcast with our host, Kelly Springer. Kelly, how are you? And I know you're excited about our guest, and he's going to break things down beyond belief when it comes to what a doctor sees about nutrition, while what you see about nutrition is going to be a great connection. How are you, Kelly?
I'm great. And I was already reading this bio, which is beyond impressive, everybody. So, just so you know, there's a huge bio in front of me because this man has done a lot of things. But today's guest brings a powerful blend of medical expertise and personal reflection. So, welcome, Dr. Jack Rocco. It's a board certified orthopedic surgeon with over 30 years of experience, and his career has taken him across the globe. But now we're going to talk about the Ultimate Men's Clinic in New Bedford, correct? That's our focus for today, Doctor?
Correct. Correct.
And other things too, Kelly. Just like ask a story, because the book is really a great way to show that connectivity, but he really has that health side too. Meaning the fact of the matter is that he's worked in with women and men with certain weight loss procedures, but really looks at specifically enough the holistic point of view, which I'm so blown away. He woke me the heck up. He woke me up again saying, what the hell am I doing of my
Right.
body? I'm back in intermittent fasting again. Between him and Laura Ribbons, I'm like, okay, now, hello, wake up. What am I doing with processed foods? I was on the right track and I fell off the wagon. He
Yeah,
brought
I
me
think that's a
back
great.
on. They brought me back off the wagon. But go
I
ahead.
think that I
Yeah.
think that's a great segue, Neil. You kind of nail it. You know, I grew up. I'm a '60s child. Grew up in the '70s, eating my bowl of Cocoa Puffs and what do they call it? The little Pop Tarts and all the processed food. I mean, it seems like our generation was really an experiment in nutrition that has failed horribly. You know, the introduction, it wasn't long before my birth where Tang and Spam and some of these processed foods started coming out. And, you know, growing up, we mostly ate at home. But then over the decades, you know, the amount of processed food and subsequent diseases that have followed it, you know, that you can't negate the impact of the food industry as it correlates directly with the rise in obesity, the rise in diabetes, hypertension. You know, all of these processes, when you break them down, are from inflammatory reactions, you know, to the food that we make, and the fact that we never fast. We never have a period in general where you're spending 12 to 16 to 18 or more hours fasting, because your body needs that time to process and integrate and clean up the last meal. So, you know, I've seen the last 2 years I've spent doing liposuction. So I see, you know, I've seen the very end stage. And even with that, I mean, the procedures do a great job of sculpting, you know, the outside layer of fat, but it does nothing for the visceral fat, which is the deep fat. That's, you know, behind your muscle. That's the stuff that will kill you. That's the fat that'll promote diabetes. So over the couple of years that I've been doing this, I've really developed an interest in what else can you do besides lipo. Lipo isn't the answer for most of these. You know, it's a cosmetic procedure, but in order to really get to someone's health, you need to change their diet and a lot of their food habits.
I agree.
There you go.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And I was just talking to someone the other day. I was the opposite. I was actually raised extremely healthfully. My grandmother and my mother knew nutrition before anybody else did, I swear. And so I was really fortunate to not be raised on that. And the difference I saw with my brothers being D1 lacrosse players and Broadway stars and everything else, because truly believe in that healthy nutrition. And I think that if we can get back to that real food topic, it makes such a difference in our health. And just like you, I worked, one of my first jobs was in bariatrics, so understood obesity from a really, really young age, and learning and listening to what people were eating, and the yo-yo diets that they had been on. So talk about what you now implement and how you help people, and what this new Ultimate Men's Clinic is.
Yeah. Well, you know, the Ultimate Men's Clinic kind of came out of what I've seen over the years. You know, I was in the service, so I treated a lot of men in the service, and then you come out of the service, and you know those vets naturally gravitate towards you. You know, you mentioned I'm a Shriner, I'm a Mason, so I've got a lot of guy friends, and anytime I show up, you know, with these crew who I love, just love these guys, but the first thing they do, hey doc. Hey doc, hey doc, you know, I was at the doctor, my shoulder, my hip, my spleen, my liver, you know, they're hitting me with all the questions. But you realize that, you know, a lot of these guys, they rarely go to a doctor. You know, they're looking forward to seeing me to get some free curbside advice, which is nice to have that. But you know, men need to take care of themselves on more than a regular basis. And I think, you know, for me, the other thing that gets hugely ignored with men is their mental health. And, you know, it is something that, you know, we say about the men's clinic, you know, it's really not as much about the little head as it is the big head. You know, a lot of, you know, issues that men have do originate from some sense of insecurity, some sense of not being able to achieve the levels that society, you know, consciously or subconsciously puts on us. So it's a lot of pressure on men, and then they don't go to each other for these things. You know, the female network of support is clearly much more developed. And, you know, I think men a lot of times are left behind, and they don't know the questions to ask sometimes. So the idea of a men's clinic is kind of bringing together my passions of orthopedics, cosmetic procedures, as well as general health and fitness, you know, to try and get men, you know, to lose the weight, to get back into the gym, you know, to, you know, perhaps supplement with some different products, but really to try and avoid medications if you can. I mean, ultimately, if you have, you know, your food should be a big part of your medicine. If you have good food, like I said, you were fortunate to grow up, and my
Yeah.
family, we did do a lot of cooking at home, but I was on that fence of, you know, it was the 70s, and you know, breakfast was, you know, Fruit Loops or something like that. And you know, but the other thing that I'm kind of incorporating a lot of ideas from my book. You know, I wrote a book about my adoption journey, and
Hmm.
in the book, you know, the details are not relevant to this um, discussion, other than the fact that I split my life into nurture, nature, and free will. And I think this really comes into play when it comes to nutrition, because I think nutrition a lot of times, you know, practically is based on tradition.
It
You
is.
know, that around Christmas, you know, like I said, as I wrote the book about my life, my nurturing, um, it was all centered around the table, the dining room table, the birthday cake, you know, the Christmas cookies, the Easter candy. You know, it's like so much of our existence and our cultural life is based around food. And, you know, traditionally, you know, I would say my grandparents, you know, they were products of the Great Depression. So that now that they had a big family and a nice finished basement, you know, they kind of showed off their opulence or their success with food by feeding the family. And, you know, we all love that. But then as everybody starts to get obese, you start to wonder, is this tradition counterproductive to what it should be? You know, food should be a celebration of life and friendship and family, but also an opportunity to nourish our bodies. But some of the traditions, I think, have had the opposite effect of, you know, encouraging obesity and eating all the cookies at the holiday. So I think, you know, that the best thing you can do probably for improving your nutrition is sometimes changing some of those traditions that you've hung on to unnecessarily.
I think you're right. We talk about that, and people are so tied to those traditions. And through education, I believe that we can say, okay, well, we can still have some of these foods, but we need to understand what they're doing.
Right.
So, um, but so you remind me, my husband is Russian and Italian. You look very similar. He's also a surgeon.
Oh,
So it's interesting. His house was filled with food, and um, he still to this day like loves cooking. It's one of his favorite things to do. But he brings the cultures in, and the flavors and the profiles are just absolutely delicious. But getting onto that real food message has been incredible. So I tend to do a lot of the grocery shopping, and then he does the cooking so that we keep it healthy as
that's
well.
that's great. Great partnership.
Yeah.
So Dr. Jack, I guess when you think about it, what are when you're talking about the Ultimate Men's Clinic, what is your hope for men that come to the clinic? What are they?
Yeah, like I said, I think the idea is flourishing. That a lot I'm adopting more of the, despite my surgical backgrounds, my my tendency in general health is more of a functional medicine standpoint. By being able to detox your body, by being able to eat properly, reduce your consumption of ultra high processed foods, and get back into the basics. By fasting. Your body needs time to fast, and even prolonged fasting has been shown to improve, to eliminate through autophagy, eliminate some of these precancerous cells. They call them zombie cells. So longer, 48 to 72-hour fasts, your body starts eating those cells that are pre-senescent. They're ready to die or potentially metastasize or modify into a malignancy. So the value of fasting, we're all taught to eat healthy, but we're not taught how to fast healthy. And I think that should be, with any diet, I think some degree of fasting to give your body a chance to process is necessary.
So, how long do you go in between? This is a curious topic for me. Um,
I'll answer the question next, Kelly, after Jack on this.
Yeah, I typically recommend, my understanding of it, and I think people would agree, is that once you have an insulin spike, typically it lasts about 12 hours, so that your insulin would dip to a very low level. So between, as long as you have insulin in your system, you're potentially creating fat. You're creating, that's what insulin's job is to push the sugar into the cells to create fat. But if you start to eat again before 12 hours, before the level's gone down, you chronically have this high elevated insulin level. And that's where you get the insulin sensitivity and a lot of the gut, the visceral fat. So by fasting, that allows your insulin level to go low, where your body will then transfer into a state of eating the fat, of utilizing the fat through gluconeogenesis to restore the glucose levels. But without the fast, you're never in that state. And I think it's important I say 16 hours of fasting and 8 hours of an eating window. I think that gives you a good amount of fat burning as well as.
so is that like eating twice a day?
Yeah, typically I would say, I recommend the patients, if you eat your dinner at 6 o'clock, I'd recommend finishing early rather than later. So if you finish by 6 o'clock, the next morning by 10 or 11 is the time when you would break your fast. So then, you could eat a lunch then, and then eat your dinner at 6. So that would encompass 2 meals. And I think that's, a very good way to go about it.
Hmm. Now, Kelly, what's your recommendation? I'll tell you what I've done, but I want to know what your recommendation is as a nutritionist and and a dietitian about
Yeah.
fasting and your take.
So I do think that as I would say, like in Ayurvedic practices, as the sun goes down, stop eating, and as the sun comes up, break the fast. But I am a big believer on, and not just believer, science-based evidence on protein and fiber combination to keep those insulin levels stable and keep glucose levels stable. So understanding the neurotransmitters and how cells work and how we need to make sure we're getting those proteins and fibers, so that we are ensuring that, but not going too long so that our glucose levels go down too low and then go into keto, not hoping to go into that range, but really educating on protein and fiber rich sources together in combination to keep insulin levels at that level.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. I think I do try to keep it simple because, a lot of my patients are not complicated, the difference between fiber and carbs and, so sometimes we're guys. Like I treat regular guys who don't know what 20 grams is, So I try to keep it simple. It's like, I tell people to go around the outside of the grocery store. You're likely to find food on the outside of the grocery store. If you venture into the abyss, it's all processed food. It's all horrible for you. So You're absolutely right. The glycemic index of food is probably most important, but sometimes with some of the knuckleheads I treat, you got to keep it simple. Just stay away from the Doritos. If you can make that motivate, that move, I think that's progress.
I've done I've done OMAD, and that's interesting. One meal a day. That is a challenge, but it can be done. What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Jack and Kelly, on this one?
Yeah, my experience with it was not necessarily from a good experience, but when I went through my separation and divorce, I was living on my own, and the hospital provided us with a nice lunch every day. So I'd have a nice healthy lunch, and then I'd go home, and my depression sank in, and I'm like, why would I want to cook? Why do I want to go out? So I got into that, and clearly improved my weight, improved my health. That it was kind of a backwards way. I think some of my unhealthiest days were, when we were deep into the family life. And you got to eat every time the kids eat, and daddy's got to make sure that the French fries aren't poisoned. So I got to try everyone's food before they eat. I think, like I said, those habits and traditions of eating with the family and always getting fries and all that, some of those traditions need to be broken. But as I said, for me, the fasting and the one meal a day worked great as well.
I do think so. This is my take right now, is that everyone's living on snacks. And
Mhm.
so they're eating 24/7. These kids don't even know when they're hungry or when they're full. There's a lot going on in our society right now with constant eating. And so I do think that there is a difference between being deliberate and mindful at a meal, that to have the components that need to be there, versus just snacking. And so, Neil, I think that, like Doctor was saying, is that it's so easy to kind of grab whatever's around you. We're not even aware that food is all around us. And so, by you being deliberate on that one meal, but I don't think you can get enough nutrients, vitamins, proteins by just having that one meal. And I do see that there is complications later with deficiencies. So,
Really? So I don't do it all the time, but I try to do my intermittent fasting between sometimes 2, 3 o'clock, eat 4 o'clock, and then basically have a snack that's a healthy snack, and then eat dinner at 6 or 7, and then go through the whole process again, depending on my schedule. Some days, oh, well, if it's good breakfast that Vanessa cooks, then well, I'll have that, and then I won't eat again till dinner. So it
Yeah.
kind of goes in that, but the breakfast is like not 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning. It's like 9 or 10 o'clock. Then that's what I'm eating. So, and I'm really focusing now on, more fiber rich foods. See, Kelly does it. So all these different things, but it's funny being 6'10". This is the funny part, is because I'm doing this yoga, strength yoga with DDP, and and when I walk with Chewy, I'll keep in that yoga pose, this one DDP yoga pose the whole way through. I'm building more muscle, and I'm not losing much weight, and losing fat. So it's weird, because of strength resistance yoga, you don't lose weight. You don't. You build more and more muscle. It's ridiculously crazy. Yeah, I don't need to lift anymore. I don't even. It's interesting. Did you know Chris Jericho, former WWE star? He doesn't lift anymore. He just does yoga.
my
And
daughter is doing her whole presentation at school next week on resistance training, and you can use your own body weight to do
dear God, and then
resistance training.
DDP just created these resistant cuffs. I want to get them. They're really interesting. And that'll be the next thing. So why do you need to lift weights? I mean, like my legs are stronger now, just sitting here flexing them while I'm doing this interview, than going ahead and hitting the gym. And I look in better
Well,
shape
she will
now.
also tell you, Neil, I'm gonna get her on. She's gonna get you whipped into shape. She's a sports dietitian down at Ole Miss. She's gonna teach you about protein and how the body works, and making sure, as 6'10" big man, you need to make sure you're getting enough protein sources.
Okay, so protein's big for me. I'm not a big carbs fan at all. And I'm gluten free. Been
We're
pushing back
gonna
on
we're
gluten
gonna
free.
doctor, we're gonna whip him into shape.
Yes,
Oh,
that's what
I've seen worse. He's not so bad. We could work with him.
I have too. I have too. And I think you're right. And that's where we have come up with analogies to make nutrition simple and to really break it down to the lay person, so that people understand what we're saying. I think terms are thrown around, like you said, fiber and nutrients and vitamins and whatever, but we've been throwing around these words for a very long time, and people still aren't following it. So obviously that's not working. We need to really break it down into bite-sized information that people can understand and take away that day and be able to utilize it. So I'd be happy to help you with some of those really easy. And like I said, my grandfather is a Mason, and so I would love to work with all of those Shriners. I think it's a fantastic organization.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Kelly, so you're really not as much of a fan of intermittent fasting.
No.
You
I'm not. I'm really not. I have proven and shown over the past 9 years of using our program to get protein and fiber evenly throughout the day. I'm not big on snacking, just so you know. I am like an anti-snacker. My grandfather, back in those generations, like raised me for 3 meals a day of making sure there is protein and fiber. And I have seen incredible reversal of chronic disease, incredible sustainable amounts of people being able to do this for 10 years plus, because their blood sugars remain stable. And that to me is the number one goal, is making sure that those blood sugars stay stable throughout. They're feeding that gut bacteria. There's so much on gut health research these days, and needing those proteins and fiber sources to build up the gut bacteria lining. And so this is where I've seen it for so long, and what works and what doesn't. But when people are hungry and the blood sugars go low, that's when they crave simple carbohydrates. That's when they go off track.
Now, do you use any kind
Don't
of
have it in your house.
continuous
That's the best
glucose
thing.
monitoring devices?
Yeah, so we partnered with a company called GlucoSense. It's a brand new technology. We just started getting into glucose monitoring. Glucose monitoring can be one of the best ways for people to see like how foods affect them. And GlucoSense started as a type 1 diabetes, but I've pushed them into the type 2 realm. I do also I use it with perimenopause and menopausal women so that we can really start to track and see what's going on. But that's where I'm a firm believer that making sure that we have these foods throughout the day, cut out the snacking, because all the snacking is just simple carbohydrate, angry leprechauns with knives, as I call them, versus pot of gold. So if we can truly get and stabilize those blood sugar levels, we see incredible long-lasting results.
Right. Well, fantastic.
Now, what about, because there's a number of different supplement products out there. Do you claim to increase GLP production naturally by antioxidation what are your thoughts on some of that?
Our tagline forever has been real people promoting real food. I believe you can truly spur your own GLP-1 production with fiber and protein. Again, back to science-based research. I think supplementation should be used when you don't get those foods from your diet. So for instance, if you are practicing vegan, then you need to make sure that we're getting enough B12 and enough iron sources and folic acid. So looking at a person's personalized nutrition to see where they are, what they're following. If they really want to be keto, how do they follow it in the best way, and understanding where the deficiencies may come into play. So I think that nutrition, as we go forward, is going to be so personalized based on their ethnicity, their epigenetics, what's going on with them, even like what shift they work. There's so much that we can do with nutrition to help them reach their goals.
Wow, this is a great nutrition conversation with
I know, I usually
a layman and two experts. I'm just the goofball that just says, okay, I'm going to do this and that's it. And I mean, I've shown great results. People say, like, is interesting. I was talking to somebody, oh yeah, you're not old enough to remember this. One of my clients, I'm 52. I do remember this. So, it's a situation where we gotta continue to get healthy, especially when retirement, we're going to be living a lot longer. So we might as well stay healthy now, so we don't end up in a nursing home or an old age home facility. And more that
longevity is key. I think, Neil, there's so many conversations right now around the lines of longevity. And it's funny, I'll tell people, I don't care if I'm talking to a breast cancer survivor group, a longevity group, a mental health as relates to nutrition group. I literally am stating the same exact nutrition information across all genres. And if we truly could get people to eat more fiber-rich sources and protein, I believe that we would have a stronger society, less chronic disease, and be able to live longer and healthier.
Awesome. All right. Best place we can find info on you, Dr. Jack.
I would go to Amazon.com if you're looking for my book, which is called Recycled, A Reluctant Search for True Self Through Nurture, Nature, and Free Will. But you can also look online for the Ultimate Men's Clinic in New Bedford, Massachusetts.
All right. Appreciate it.
Love it, doctor. I can't wait to see what we can do together too.
Thank you,
That's
Kelly.
good.
I
There's
really
definitely a
appreciate it. Great
connection.
meeting you.
All
Nice
right.
to meet you.
And kellyschoice.org and pick up your book. Show it to Dr. Jack. Your two
Yes.
authors together.
We have the new weight loss era that puts together our
Nice.
transformation program to make it easy and concise.
That's wonderful. Congratulations.
Thanks.
All right. All right, guys. Thanks again. That was a special simulcast of the Neil Haley Show and Talk Nutrition to Me with Kelly Springer, guys. Take care.